Hello, my yarny friends. I'm Sara Sach, and welcome back to my crochet channel. Now, today's video is our this or that video. And what that means is I usually, but not always, ask you a question and give you a couple of answers that you can give your thoughts and opinion. And I love to do this because I love to read your comments on what you think about what we're talking about. Also, I can learn from you and we can all learn from each other. Because when it comes to crochet and the fiber arts, there are lots of different ways to accomplish similar things. And so what is today's question, you ask? We're talking about carrying or floating. What does that mean? Well, what we're talking about is when we change colors in the middle of projects. And this is just a couple of swatches, and I'll show them closer in just a second. But on the back, you can see I did it two different ways. This one, I floated my yarns across, and this one I carried. Now, we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to do a demo in just a second. When it comes to changing colors, you're bringing in that new yarn and you're like, what do? I have all these ends. And when you make a really big project, you have all those little tabs and things that you have to weave in, and it can be overwhelming. And sometimes people just don't want to do that. Well, before you start a great big project doing that, you might try some smaller projects practicing that. And that's when I did the checked hot pad. Was kind of a test maybe, or a practice, so that you could learn a little bit about changing colors. And so last week we did these checked hot pads. I have a checked, towel I think out there, a checked bag. I also have a checked, a mug rug, the one I use every day. There are lots of different ways to use checks or checkerboard technique. Okay, but the way I do it, I try to do what I call working smarter, not harder. And let me show you what I mean. So when we're working with the checked stitch, we are changing colors quite often in order to get that checkerboard look. Here's the mug rug. We changed colors a lot on every row. And the same thing with these. And so I had a lot of questions about it. What's the neatest way to do it? What's the easiest way to do it? And so I'm going to do a little demo here. And I want to show you what I have ready here. Let me move those out of the way. All right, so I have these two little swatches. They're both the same thing, just in two different colors. Now, I did not weave any ends in, and that was on purpose because I want you to see the difference between the two of them. On the front, they look similar, right? We have a beginning and an end of our color where we changed it, and the color that we're using on both of them. Okay? And this is the front, what they look like on the front. We've got this little swatchy thing in the middle of another color. So if I turn these over, you'll notice they don't look the same. Okay, so again, here's all our beginning and end threads. This one, when I changed colors, I stitched over that tail of yarn to hide it. This one, I let it float, and that means I did not stitch over it, I just let it float across. Now, both these techniques can be used determined by what you're making. If you're making a hot pad like we did and you're using two thicknesses and you're going to put them together, it's okay to float it. But if you're only doing one thickness and you're going to see the back of it as well, it's nice to do this technique. All right, so I'm going to use these two and show you how I did both of these so you can understand and you can decide what works best for you. So I'm starting with a row with just 9 double crochets. Okay, so we're going to have 3 of one color, 3 of another, and then 3 of our color 1. I'm just going to call them color 1 and color 2 because obviously you can do them in lots of colors. And those are kind of fun, put together and make a headband or something. All right, so we're going to chain 3. Our chain 3 will count as our first stitch. So I'm just going to stitch a double crochet in the next 2. 1 and 2. But because I'm changing colors, I'm not going to finish that third double crochet. I'm going to bring in my color 2. And I know we've talked about this in the past, and the reason we do it that way is if we would have gone ahead and made the loop and then stitched the double crochet, the first loop of the next double crochet would be pink instead of orange. All right, now the first thing I'm going to show you is how to float it. All right, so I'm just going to drop the color 1 and stitch 3 double crochets using my color 2. When I get to that third one, I'm going to bring back in my pink. Now, the thing about this is, let me go ahead and stitch those 3 because I'm going to drop that color 2 and stitch those 3 last double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to go ahead and chain 3. All right, so let's look at what we've done. So on the front, it looks, pretty neat, just like the other 2 that I did. But if we turn it over, here's where we started, and then we floated that string across. Now, like I said, this works just fine if you're not going to see the back of your project. Maybe you're making a coaster and you're going to use a felt backing, or maybe you're making some sort of a hot pad or a pillow or something that's going to have a back side, then this is okay. I don't recommend floating your work if you're going to make like a hat or scarf or something, because little fingers can get caught up there and cause it to pucker up and also not lay quite as nice. All right, so it really depends on what you're doing if the floating style will work. All right, so let's do the other style. All right, so here's my orange. I'm going to leave it over there, and we're going to do the second row stitching over. Okay, so we're going to do the same. Our chain 3 counts as our first. We're going to double crochet in the next 2, but on that third one, we're going to bring in our orange again. So we're going to bring our pink over here because this is the back of our work. We're going to grab our orange one, finish that double crochet, and now we're going to stitch our first double crochet, but you'll notice I'm going around that yarn instead of floating it, the pink one. All right, so I've stitched 3, stitching over that tail of yarn, or where we're trailing it. Okay, so now I'm going to bring my pink back in, and we're going to make sure that this orange is in the back because this is the back of our work. And the way you know where your back of your work is it's the tail where you brought in your new color. When you're stitching over it, sometimes it's hard to find the back side of your work. Wherever you brought your color 2 in and your tail is hanging, that's the back side of your work. All right, and then we'll just stitch our double crochets in those last 3 stitches. There we go. Got us a knot there, and we'll just ignore that since this is just a swatch. Okay, so when you look at your work, this tells us this is the back of our work. This is how it looks when it's floated, and this is how it looks when it's carried and we stitch over that carried yarn. Okay, let's look at the front. Now, one thing that can happen if you're not stitching your stitches too tightly, okay, there's kind of you have to stitch it tight enough where you don't see the carried yarn across the back. You don't want it poking out the pink that we stitched over, but you also don't want it too tight that it puckers up. Okay, and so that's something that you have to practice. All right, and those are the 2 ways that you can change colors. There are lots of other ways as well, but I'm just showing you the difference between floating and carrying your yarn across when you change colors. So I hope that I explained that in a way that you could understand. Now I know when you're doing a really big project, we use bobbins and change colors often to keep us from having to tie it off and weave in a bunch of ends. But if you're doing a smaller project, even if I'm doing one that's, 8 by 10 or 12 by 14, where I'm doing some color changes, I'll use this method, okay? Especially if I'm doing a C2C or a double crochet or single crochet. But you don't have to do it that way. Remember, this is just something that I had some questions about. I actually wasn't going to cover this subject this week. I had something else in mind, but I got questions about it because I just released that checked hot pad. Okay, and so the key to making it look neat when you're carrying over is not to pull too tightly, but give it enough pull where you don't see that color behind. And if you do see the second color behind, you might need to tighten up your gauge or your tension. Okay? Because you also have to remember that, cottons and acrylics and different yarns, even though they're a medium number 4 or a super bulky 6, there's wiggle room within those numbers. You know what I mean? That's why sometimes I'll call it a 3.5 or a 4.5. Just in jest. I don't put it that way on my patterns, but because there can be a lot of wiggle room in those categories, okay? And they're to help us, but sometimes, spinners, especially if they're independent spinners and things like that, don't always do it exactly perfect within, within those guidelines. And so, but that's okay. It's called fiber art for a reason, right? All right, so I hope I answered that question. And if you have any other questions like that or any other about crochet, if you want to look for it, you can go and click that link that on my YouTube channel that says playlists, and then look for the this and that playlist, and that's where I've answered a lot of those questions. And other people's opinions are important too. So if you see a subject you want to understand, maybe I didn't make it clear enough, read some of those comments, because a lot of other people are very smart. And that's why I love reading your comments. Please do comment. I do really love reading your comments. I've learned a lot from all of you. Yeah, I've been crocheting for a really long time, but that doesn't mean I know everything, because I do not. Alrighty, well, thanks for being with me today. And I'll see you next time for another edition of This or That. And sometimes the other thing. Bye-bye, everybody. See you next time.